I'd like to welcome everyone. This is Pat Bailey, Director of Training at Out and Equal, and this is our Out and Equal University Building ERG Value Part 1 course, and we'll talk a little bit about our presenters here in a bit. So let me turn it at this point over to Nancy, and I'll be coming back in when we're doing polls, and also for both of you, if at any point you want us to unmute the audience, you can discuss or have a chat with them, we can do that as well. So Nancy, all yours.
Hi everyone, I'm Nancy Mace, the Director of Community Empowerment at Out and Equal, and I'm the one on the left in the picture, just in case you're wondering. My role at Out and Equal is to provide support, coach, resource, the networks of volunteers that are out there doing the work of our mission of ending workplace discrimination for the LGBT community. And so that includes ERGs and affinity groups, our regional affiliates. So I have a strong passion about getting folks like we just heard identify themselves on the call, the tools and tips and education and information they need to be able to take the next steps with their ERGs. So today's call is actually the first in a two-part series about building ERG value. What we learned in our ERG survey that we do every 2 years, and we ran that last October, is that there's a lot of great stuff going on in ERGs. They are engaging straight allies in record numbers. They are increasing creative collaborations with non-LGBT ERGs and community partners. They're leveraging great support from HR, diversity, and even senior leadership. They're utilizing some new technologies and social media to connect dispersed employees. They're expanding relationships to access funding from a wider range of sources than ever before. And they're building an awareness, have a growing awareness that they really need to expand or introduce workplace equality to all of the locations in their organizations and not necessarily just those corporate locations. The same survey tells us that the biggest challenges facing our ERGs today are engaging more members in the work. We hear stories of a lot of ERGs that are really few people who do the lion's share of the work. So helping them figure out how to engage more folks, how to do succession planning for the dedicated volunteer leadership. We hear a lot that what they really need is more tools for demonstrating business impact and return on investment. And they're struggling, especially our global companies, with navigating cultural and geographical boundaries to reach all of their employees. So now more than ever, the call to action is for greater sharing of ideas and tools and best practices across these exceptional networks. At Out and Equal, we remain committed to supporting and enabling even higher levels of success for these vital organizations. And we are very pleased and proud today to be joined by Jerry Lupacino. Jerry's a partner at Global Novations, which is a consulting services arm of Korn Ferry. Global Novations has a multicultural team of training and development experts who are focused on building skill, capacity, and the performance of employees. Jerry's been with that group since 1994 and has been working with key clients on the development and implementation of diversity initiatives. In his role, he creates inclusion-focused, skills-based programming. He also originated the curriculum specifically targeted to transforming the effectiveness of ERGs and affinity groups. As the senior LGBT executive at Global Novations, these programs and the broader topic are a personal passion that has helped Global Novations expand its practice significantly. Jerry holds an MBA from the University of Hartford and is also engaged in grad work in the field of organizational development. We are very excited to be partnering with him on developing high-impact tools and training for our ERGs, and we're going to get just a little taste of that today. So it's my privilege to welcome Jerry and turn it over to you.
Well, that's a very nice introduction, and I hope I live up to half of that written introduction. I think it sounds great. I just want to make sure, Nancy, you can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. If I'll explain to the folks that are on the phone that I am in an airport in a conference room in an airport lounge, and I've got connectivity that seems like it's stable, but one never knows. So my apologies in advance for any technical issues. It's really a pleasure to be here today on the phone. Anytime I have a chance to talk about this work, I'm happy to. We do the work that we do as an organization is very broad in terms of its impact in the diversity space. Over the last 10 or 12 years, our company has acquired most companies within the space of diversity and inclusion, and so I know that, Regina, you might be familiar with, and others on the line, of J. Howard & Associates, Simmons Associates, Global Lead, Pro Group, Novations Group. All of those companies have been merged and acquired over the last 10 years to become Global Novations, and we were just acquired last October by Korn Ferry International, which is the largest search placement company in the world. So we went from having 3 offices to having 79 offices, and we're excited about the breadth and scope of impact that we're going to be able to create through this new partnership. So I've been with the company 19 years. I've seen an awful lot, probably half of its 35 years worth of existence. When we were asked to talk about building ERG value, one of the things that we begin with is to identify, or to help participants identify how their ERGs are perceived within the organization, and to really start there to understand what the perception of their brand is within their organization. And so the value scale that we use that's in front of you right now is a real simple way of thinking about how your employee resource group or network is seen by those outside of your constituency. And it's important to know that because securing funding, attracting non-constituent members, securing senior leadership support all comes or starts at an opportunity to increase the overall perceived value of your ERG. And so in this scale, we talk about a range of perception. We start at tolerance, sort of in the middle, to say, is your resource group tolerated? And candidly, we all know what it's like to be tolerated, and it's not a pleasant experience. But at the same time, tolerance in terms of perception of ERG is that the groups are, quote, allowed to form, comma, they are, quote, supported. But you can tell by the language that I'm using that there isn't a high level of value associated necessarily with those ERGs that are tolerated. There are some ERGs that are avoided. Sometimes when we work with ERGs that are representing unique religions, or even the LGBT ERGs, others that are more outside of the, quote, mainstream of the organization, people talk about those ERGs, those groups. They refer to them or they when referring to the constituents. There are some ERGs that are met with repulsion within an organization. Again, the differences that are represented by the constituency are so unique that people candidly move as far away from either the individuals or the representation of those individuals as they can. But up at the top of the scale is the concept of acceptance and appreciation. And by appreciation, we really mean value rather than gratitude. So think about it like appreciation of an asset. So the extent to which your ERG can be most highly valued, either accepted or appreciated, has a direct impact and correlation in terms of your ability to secure funding and support for your efforts and initiatives. So this is your first poll. So based on my brief description, I'd like for you to think, based on your observations of behaviors and other data points, how do you see your LGBT resource group being perceived? Is it being seen through the lens of repulsion, avoidance, tolerance, acceptance, or appreciation, based on the criteria that I gave you just a moment ago?
And again, on these polls, make sure that you click your answer in and then hit submit, or you can skip to the responses. Again, we have about 7 folks on the call, so we're up to about 5 of them so far. I'll give everybody a minute to come back from the other multitaskings. And Jerry, if you want to make any comments on the polls, go right ahead.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm pleased to see this. I have to tell you that in larger situations or sessions that I've conducted, the sadness that is oftentimes related is that most of the LGBT resource groups and many of the companies within we're beginning our work are tolerated. And then when we ask them to share the data that says that they are tolerated, they realize that, in fact, when they start talking about the data that indicates their level of appreciation, that they are more likely avoided. And so what we ask people to do is say, what's the data that shows that you're accepted? How are your efforts and initiatives received by non-constituent participants throughout the organization? And it's great that I'm seeing acceptance and appreciation at such a high level. One of the organizations that I was with this week shared with me that what elevated the LGBT population dramatically was the direct connection that the resource group connected to a unique market that organization had been trying to tap for years. And it wasn't until the LGBT resource group created the connections that it did that really opened up the market for those individuals. And there was an actual return on investment dollars in the hundreds of thousands of dollars from that market within the last 6 months based on the efforts of that LGBT resource group. So we are seeing it more. I'm happy to see this level of reaction. And candidly, if you take a look at what the data is for, hang on a second, the data is from the survey that Nancy was referencing earlier, you can see that people, in terms of how they see their ERG within the organization, are still a little bit all over the board. In terms of being advanced and high performing, you can see that score is coming in at 6.3%. If you look at the red column, operating as a full business partner to the organization, that's at 15%. Established but always looking to improve is to 28.3%. You know, I think it's important to continue to assess how your ERG is seen by the organization so you can determine where and how to spend your efforts, money, and time. And so the session that we're going to review today over the next 45 minutes or so addresses these questions. The first is, how do you position the resource group as a strategic resource? And again, this moves it past an accommodation. It moves it past something that's tolerated and moves it further into an appreciated resource. The second question that typically comes up is, you know, maybe we just want to be an affinity group. Maybe we don't necessarily want to be a resource group because we really have a difficult environment here, and an affinity group, or the traditional definition of an affinity group, is a safe place for us to meet and gather. The third question is if in fact you want to continue to grow, both in terms of individuals that you attract and talent that you might attract to the organization, how do you gain the support that you need from leaders in order to do that? And then what's the best way for you to impact the overall experience of acceptance and appreciation for your constituents, but also for the organization as a whole? So those particular questions are the ones that most often come up. The poll question next that's in front of you, I'd ask for you to consider where you're spending most of your time right now. And this is the data is important for us to hear. We're seeing some trends, and I'd like to be able to test these with you as well. So based on the high level of review of your efforts and initiatives currently in place, where are you spending most of your time? Now, this is not an exhausted list, but I'd like for you to think about, if you had to choose from one of these four, where would you think you were spending most of your time relative to these four areas? Number one, attracting members to your group. Number two, more broadly, attracting talent to the organization, so outreach, recruiting, etc. Number three, executing on events and initiatives that you have planned. Or number four, really focusing on increasing the positive impact that the contribution of your constituents can have and the increased value that they would experience.
And again, Jerry, we see the poll results coming in. We've got about 5 folks who have answered, and I know April has joined us as well from the Out and Equal staff. And I know Regina mentioned on the last call that they don't have an ERG yet, so I proposed to her to think about how your workplace would consider this, or what do you think they'd work on as an answer?
Yeah, that's really, yeah, and what, now if there's no resource groups, Regina, I'm not sure. It sounds like there's a blending of several of them, is that correct?
I don't think they have any ERG groups.
Okay, great.
No, they don't have an LGBT resource group.
So I'm seeing here that, and this is consistent. About a third of the time is spent attracting members to a group, because membership implies power. And then about a third of the time is typically spent focusing on events and initiatives. And about a third of the time, and in this case I'm seeing half of the time, is spent impacting the contribution and perceived value of the constituencies. These are important things to acknowledge. The piece that most often scores lowest is the concept of attracting talent to an organization. And anecdotally, a couple of years ago I was with one of the top 4 accounting firms in the US, and we were at an ERG conference, and the CEO came to the front of the room, and it was a ballroom, so imagine 300 or 400 people in this room. And they were all of the leaders from 79 different resource groups, including LGBT, women, the standard groups, plus a variety of religion and women at work, et cetera, groups. And he asked the question, how many people in the room believe that their key value in terms of leading ERGs is increasing membership? And about a half of the group raised their hand. And I remember my sponsor leaning over and saying, everybody that raised their hand are the lowest performing ERGs in our group. He then asked the question, how many people in the room see that their primary directive is to drive talent into the organization, to show that, to increase the representation of the constituents within the organization in order to increase their perceived value, et cetera. And about a third of the audience raised their hand. And those were the largest and most successful resource groups. So they had created a brand where membership was a given and increasing talent and representation was their target. It was a good example of the difference where groups can be along their evolution. So some groups when they're forming, or groups that are maybe overwhelmed in terms of a lack of membership, but a lot of initiatives and activities that want to be done, really need to focus on that first bucket. But groups that are oftentimes evolutionarily more mature find themselves being real resources to the organization in terms of securing talent. And what I really love about this, of course, is the big red line going across the screen that says, focusing on the positive impact, contribution, and perceived value of the constituents, because that is the necessary and probably most valued effort from a resource group. So just to take a look at how people measure success, because I think this is an important one, it goes back to the data. If you look at the red column all the way to the right, you can see that most ERG are measuring membership numbers for success. But if you look down to the blue all the way to the left, fewer are measuring marketing and sales results. Let's see, the next one is the light blue all the way to the right, event attendance. And it's these kinds of metrics that I would call out as cautionary. If in fact the ERG is known or is measuring its success in terms of its membership or event attendance, then it's going to be perceived as an event planner rather than a strategic partner. But the more it can overtly connect its initiatives to the organization's goals and objectives, which is what we'll talk about in a few minutes, then it is more likely they'll get the support both financially as well as organizationally that they're looking for. So if in fact you're finding that you're measuring those two things on the right, it's important that you notice that there are other opportunities in terms of measuring success, but the most important or the most powerful impacts that we're seeing are those groups that are able to connect to the business objectives of the organization. So what we are solving for, all of a sudden my laptop just froze up, is the following. Number one, an ERG, based on our research, can't be only an affinity network and survive. It used to be able to be that, but the ocean is rising around us. So if you have an affinity network and you're pushing back against being perceived as a resource group, and there are others within your group of resource groups that you might see doing that, we're finding that that's being less and less tolerated by the large organizations. You can't, focusing on just attracting more members is limiting, both for the ERG and the perception of the people around you. Making more of its traditional, it cannot be only about making more of its traditional constituents more effective. It has to be about making all of the employees within the organization more effective. We were working with a pharmaceutical firm in New York, and the LGBT resource group conducted a financial planning for singles taking care of their aging parents. And they did that specifically because so many of us that have aging parents and that we may not follow the traditional norms of wife and kids, the care of our adult parents and aging parents seem to fall on us. And so the financial planning or the needs that you need to understand are critical. And so the LGBT group opened the conference certainly to its constituency, and then said, if anybody else would like to come. Well, their constituents number 80 people, and there were 300 people who signed up for this. And so immediately elevated the LGBT group as a group that was valued to the rest of the organization as well as to its constituents, and changed the perception immediately of the group from being party planners, which is how they had been perceived, to being real strategic partners to many people in the organization. And the last thing is that the ERG can't self-contain or self-sustain its work anymore because of the needs of the constituencies, and as broad as they are getting, it's really critical that we're able to shift to a more unlimited framework, a way of really impacting the community, our LGBT community. So ERGs can be known, here's the option, as having a broadly defined value. So to themselves, the organization, the community, broadly relevant, responsive, and agile. Keeping your hand on the pulse of what's happening. There's another ERG that I was working with that hosted an adoption clinic for both straight and LGBT constituents or employees rather, so that they could come and learn what the organization was doing on behalf of helping them adopt children. And it was terrific because the individuals that were asked to attend or be involved, hang on one second, I'm getting an exit slide here. I may have to default Pat to you advancing the slides just based on some technology issues that are popping up here. Anyways, so engaging broader audiences to accomplish more of what the groups themselves wanted to accomplish. The centers of expertise that drive inclusion, engagement, and productivity. All of these are what ERGs can be better known to do, rather than being those self-contained units. So it's a jump, as you can imagine. It's kind of a leap for the ERGs to move, especially if you were an affinity group and now you're trying to evolve to an ERG. So could you advance the next slide, please, because my system just froze up. Okay.
We're on the 4 stages. You got it?
Yeah, you're on the 4 stages? Yeah, thank you. No, because I can't say anything, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, so just let me know as we continue to move through, and I'll do the best that I can. The 4 stages of contribution that's in front of you talk about the movement that employees make from each career stage that drives their succession within a company. And so we all start off at stage 1, which is where you're contributing dependently. And that should be a short period of time. So if you're new to an organization or being hired into an organization, that career stage is sort of painful. It's where you're dependent upon being told where the coffee is, this is how you get paid, this is where you can park, you want to get out of it as soon as you can. And you know that you're out of it when one day you go to work and you come home and your significant other or spouse or friend says, how was work? And you say, great, I got a lot done. It was really terrific. And you realize that you actually contributed independently. And that really is where your value to the organization increases substantially, but not quite as much as when you move into stage 3. The reason why I'm talking about this is because the non-traditional populations in most organizations struggle with this movement. So whether you're a woman as part of a mostly male organization, an LGBT constituent as part of a largely straight conservative organization, a person of color in a largely white organization, however you see yourself as different from the traditional work group within the organization, making these novations, these movements from one career stage to the next can be really challenging, especially the movement from stage 2 to stage 3. That's by far the most challenging. And you know as well as I do, if you are an individual contributor, or if you've worked for a manager who has been an individual contributor, then he or she oftentimes gets promoted before they are ready. And so that's why, even though people might make the move from being an individual contributor to a manager, that they still operate at stage 2 as an independent contributor. And stage 4 are the mentor strategists, the key leaders within the organization. And so those are the individuals who really contribute strategically throughout the and control and influence broadly the organization. So on the left-hand side, you see the word impact. So the higher the impact is a stage 4, and that the movement of impact from stage 2 to stage 3 is really quite dramatic. Now, all of those things that I just listed are on the next slide. If you could go to the next slide, it should say characteristics of the 4 stages.
Yes.
And this is for your information. So when you download the deck, and I'm not here, you'll have a description of what the 4 stages are. So you don't have to cover it, but you can see that the greatest value are those individuals who are able to novate from stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. Now, where this connects to diversity is what I mentioned earlier, but our research you'll see on the next slide, which will say distribution based on gender, shows that women in our research, and this is from 2008 and 2009, less frequently make the novation from stage 2 to stage 3. And in fact, the drop from 21% to 13% is dramatic as compared to the increase from 79 to 87% of men. And candidly, in many organizations, you'll hear the reference, they just don't make it here. Or women, they're really not, once they get into that position, they aren't necessarily able to handle it. You'll also hear references to what sounds like women aren't bright enough, or they don't have the unique skill set. There are all of these sort of judgments that are made about why women, specifically in this study, aren't necessarily able to make the novation. Look at the next slide, which is race and ethnicity based. And you can see in this data set that the Asian, Black, and Hispanic representatives within this study novated less frequently than the white individuals did. Now here's this information, and I'm sorry I can't see the chat question, so Pat and Nancy, if anything comes up, please just stop me and call it out, because this data can be a little bit confusing. The piece that's behind this is every participant that was a woman or a minority race or ethnicity scored themselves higher in terms of readiness to move from stage 2 to stage 3. It was their managers that scored them lower, and scored them lower than other white managers, and white males specifically. And so the aha for us is that as individuals who are diverse, the headwinds that one experiences in trying to move through the organization are both personal. In other words, do I feel like I'm capable? It's kind of a high risk. There aren't a lot of people at senior levels that look like me. I'm not sure if people like me can make it here. There's enough data that says maybe that people like me can't make it here, especially if I'm out in LGBT. There's very few people oftentimes at senior levels that are also out in LGBT that are leaders. And so the question needs to be asked, when I then combine my self-doubt with positioning in the organization that has managers oftentimes rating my capability or readiness less, do I really even have a chance to move from stage 2 to stage 3? And so if we talk about the value of an ERG and the commitment that you all said you had earlier, which is to increase the readiness, skill set, preparedness, courage, confidence of your constituents, then is that where is the result in terms of promotion and movement through the organization one of your metrics to determine the success of your ERG? So the first thing to do relative to this data is to think about where most of your constituents are. Because again, as you think about the work, energy, efforts, initiatives that you want to focus on this next coming year, are they going to be focused towards the right level of individuals? Are they focused on moving people that are new to the organization from stage 1 to stage 2? Are they focused on people who really want to advance their careers, focused on stage 2 to stage 3? Or are they focused really on moving people through stage 3 to prepare themselves for leaders? But think about where most of your constituents are, and if you would go to the next slide.
And we've got another poll up now again. So based on those observations, it appears that most of our constituents are currently in the following stages of their career. So again, stage 1 is dependent, stage 2 independent, stage 3 contribute through others. And again, select your results and hit submit. And as we start getting the numbers in there, we've got about 100% right now are saying state 2 independent.
Mm-hmm.
Then now it's kind of 80%. We've got about 5 results in, with 20% at stage 3. I'll give everybody another minute or two here. And Elizabeth asked the question, what's meant by our constituents? Is that our ERG members?
Yeah, and I use the term constituents because it depends on your organization. Some people have members, some people have supporters, some people just have attendees. So constituents would be those individuals you represent by your ERG. So if I'm heading the LGBT group, then it would be those people who are members or who benefit from the activities of my LGBT leadership.
Sounds good. And it looks like we've got almost everybody in now. We've got 83% are at stage 2 independent, and 16.7% are at stage 3 contribute through others. Okay. And Mike had a comment, says, what if your organization is evenly distributed?
Oh, great. So you're LGBT.
All the above.
All the above. Excellent. Okay. Well, here's the good news. It's oftentimes a mature ERG that has a broad distribution. It doesn't happen by accident. So Mike, it's great that if it's happening, I just want to make sure that you acknowledge that it's through really intense effort, and if it's rare that it just happens. It's a unique organization that has that broad of a span, and I'll talk about why in a second. But here's the thing. If you want to attract leaders to your ERG, then, and what you are attracting are stage 2, then when you do your planning for the upcoming year in terms of events and initiatives, are you planning thoughtfully about those things that would attract stage 3 individuals? So I'm not going to do this now based on time, but if you go back to the slide that we covered earlier when you get it, that describes the stages by characteristic, make sure that at least 1 or 2 events or initiatives that you conduct during the year really link to the stage 3 to stage 4 individual. Now, this is real hard. Most people say, yeah, it does connect to them because I'm asking them to show up. Or, oh, yes, it does connect to stage 4 because they're going to be speaking there. That's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about really working to create an initiative or event that people at that level within an organization, stage 3 and stage 4, would find valuable. And that's really challenging. And the Beyond Affinity work that we do and that we'll be doing for a regional meeting in a couple of days talks about what are the specific actions or what are the specific initiatives and tactics that you can take in order to address and to bring to your group those at stage 3 and stage 4. Not that being stage 2 is not good, but you'll find that those individuals have that level, appropriately, that level of influence within the organization. And what you're looking for, of course, is a distribution across the board. Okay. Any other questions coming through before I move on? So let's move on to the next slide about why people join ERGs, because this really does talk to your research and data regarding why people might join a resource group, specifically the LGBT resource group. And you can see that, number one, people want to create change. And I've got to say, it's the reason why I do this work. There's this bit of militancy in me that says, it's time. And I think that many of us think that when we're doing this work as well, that if we are fortunate enough to work at an organization that is open to this level of change, then we know that there's a moment here that needs to be accelerated. But community and networking, that's really a stage 3 reason for joining. People want to broaden their connections from the people that they might normally work with to people more broadly throughout an organization. That is a stage 3 indicator. And so what's interesting is that the perception might be that you have mostly stage 2, but what they are looking for is the ability of support to move to stage 3. And then there are a couple of things here. Professional development, 43.1%. That's oftentimes missed by a lot of ERGs. They don't see that there is this great opportunity for people to lead initiatives and therefore gain press within the organization as being leaders within the group. Career development, the same thing. And this type of development, this type of growth, moving from stage 2 to stage 3, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes, if you go to the next slide, had been attributed to the fact that people weren't necessarily smart enough to move from stage 2 to stage 3, or they lacked the necessary skills for the job, because most people are promoted by being great independent contributors, and therefore, well, they just didn't have what it takes. But we know that there are 3 skills, 3 sets of competences that we call them, that attribute or support an individual's success in moving from stage 2 to stage 3. One is technical, so you have to be smart, but most organizations hire that. The other is the political skill set and the social skill set. In the political skill set, what I mean by political is the ability to navigate the organization, to be able to, the certain amount of smarts and savviness that knows who you should know at a higher level than you, how to communicate at that level. It's really a confidence indicator in terms of navigation. What do I need to know in order to get ahead? Then there's the social skill set that you need, the ability to connect, to make people feel at ease, to empathize, that sort of EQ, if you would, that social point of view, so that people feel comfortable being around you. And oftentimes, especially in the LGBT community, there are so many things that we'll talk about in a moment that prevent that level of comfort, people getting to know you, the ability for you to feel comfortable reaching out. So those are the 3 very, very simply stated competences that need to be developed. And there are unique challenges for each of those. So I'd like to go to the next polling slide.
And this one, we're up on the poll. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so in your experience, how would you distribute the impact that each competence has on career success within your organization? Do you think that technical skill set has the strongest impact? Sometimes that shows up in technology-based organizations. Political has the strongest impact. Social has the strongest impact. Or they're all about equal.
And as we're starting to get the votes in, we've just got a couple of votes, but it looks like about 66% are saying they're about equal, 33% political has the strongest impact. We'll get a few more votes in there.
Great. And so you're absolutely on track. When we ask this question to a larger group, to an ERG gathering within an organization, most individuals either believe that it's the social skill set, it's sort of who you know kind of thing, or it's all equally balanced. If you go to the next slide, you can see that, in fact, our research shows that the political skill set is the most important, the ability to navigate the organization. But what I want you to take away from this slide is that the survey, this data comes from a survey of 1,000 business unit leaders at senior levels within several financial services organizations. And this is how we conducted this. And I would encourage the group, I would encourage anyone who's listening, to have the same back of the napkin exercise in your organization. We simply ask the question, if you think about what's made you successful here, and these are people that have been with the organization 10, 15, 20 years. If you think about what's made you successful here, you're now a senior vice president on up. What are the things that were critical to your success? And we said list 5 to 10 things that have happened to you or that you've experienced. And then we broke them into these buckets, technical, political, and social. And virtually every organization, when they were a subset, but overall, really came to these numbers. 73% of the things that happened to them or that they experienced were more important to their success than the technical skills they brought to the job. The problem is that you don't learn the political and social skills outside of the workplace. You learn it when you come to the workplace. The technical skills you learn outside. So 3/4 of what you need to be successful you learn on the job, but if you're in an environment that makes it difficult for an individual to learn those things, then you're up the creek. And so one of the things that we know from this research is that when individuals identify the need to develop their political and social skills, the first place those diverse employees often go is their ERG. So the second piece that we'd ask for you to consider is not only are you attracting the broad range of executives, leaders, managers, et cetera, but are you providing technical, political, and social skills development to your constituents, to the people who come to the ERG for support. A lot of times we might do social. When I look at calendars, events, and initiatives, they're oftentimes in that bucket. Or they might do technical training and initiatives, certain skills development like, hard skills that are related to the achievement of your job. They may offer seminars around that. But the political skill set oftentimes, and the political skill set is great when it's presented by people that are senior in the organization that talk about what got them ahead and how to learn those hidden secrets, rules, and handshakes that if you weren't that traditional work group or majority population, you would struggle to learn otherwise. So it's about 10 of right now, and I know we have about 20 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we're leaving time for Q&A. So before we get into the barriers that prevent people from learning those skills on the job, are there any questions that I can't see that are coming up? Are we good?
And yeah, Jerry, it looks like we're good. I haven't seen any more questions come in at this point. So.
Thank you. So the barriers, number one, the complexity of understanding who we are, and this is on the next slide, makes it very hard for people to support us. There's one term that defines the other side, which is straight, and then there's these terms that people feel like they need to learn and master. And there are terms on here that until we begin to do research about what people are hearing about the LGBT population within the workplace, that people had never seen before, like transgenderist and intersexual, terms that because of the lack of general understanding and the unique lexicon that connects to our group, makes it difficult for people to feel that they could truly understand. It's as if, those of you that are more creative, when you look at a spreadsheet, I don't know about you, but I get lost in all of the columns and numbers, et cetera. Or somebody who's really spreadsheet oriented and looks at a very large creative plan and gets lost and they can't necessarily find their way through. Even the people I talk to that are allies say, I had to give up having to understand everything to my satisfaction and just go along for the ride and know that I'm going to learn pretty much every day that I interact with members from this group. On the next slide, and you're going to be covering these in an upcoming session, so I'm glad that I'm talking to them, but we're not going to cover them in depth, that the combination of representation dynamics here relative to the individual is also very complex, as represented by the LGBT population within an organization. So first it's my biological sex, what makes me up from in terms of anatomy, chromosome, and hormone. And then there's my psychological sense of self, what we call gender identity, that makes me a man, by gender a woman. And then there's how I communicate myself, by how I communicate gender, whether it's masculine, androgynous, or feminine, or my sexual orientation, physical and emotional response to others, whether I'm attracted to men, women, or I'm bisexual or asexual. And so, if you just sort of go down the list, I could be an anatomical female who identifies as a man, but expresses myself through androgyny, and I'm attracted to men. And that, you get as many permutations or combinations as you can imagine, makes trying to understand this. And as people bring more of themselves to work, and gender identity now becomes part of an overall concept or statement within many organizations' protection clause, or gender expression as part of the protection clause, it does a service to the constituents in our groups, but it actually makes it more challenging for individuals to really understand what's not what's at stake, but what the broadest responsibility is for understanding a true LGBT community. I want to keep going on this, not to belabor this, but on the next slide, based on the 2009 HRC survey, 51% of LGBT employees are still hiding their identity the most at work. And we have to consider that there are pockets throughout the U.S. specifically and globally that might be very receptive to people out at work, but there are many more organizations that in fact make it dangerous for people to come out at work based on their gender identity, gender expression, etc. 5% of the LGBT employees 18 to 24 say they are totally open at work. Both Nancy and I believe that number should have been higher and should be higher. But we have to consider the fact that totally open is the qualifier there. And so as a 52-year-old white male executive working with Fortune 500 firms, I can tell you that I'm not totally open, that my ability to connect with people and my initial interactions with them is a very delicate walk. Today I was with a client here in Cleveland, and they came in and hugged me. I've been working with them now for 2 years, and they asked how my partner was and how things are going at home, and they knew that I'm taking care of my aging mom. And that's more or less what usually happens, is over a period of time of building trust on both sides of the table, then my sexuality comes out. But for the most part, totally open at work is the qualifier, and only 5% of folks 18 to 24 say that they are. And I suspect the number goes down as the age goes up. 58% of LGBT workers say someone at work makes a joke or derogatory comment about LGBT at least once in a while. And the piece that we have to consider is we're the only ones not protected against that. And there are many large organizations that in their clause around protection don't include LGBT. We think that they do. I could mention 3 right now that would probably startle you to think that these are companies that are that big and don't have LGBT in terms in their protection clause. So something happens, there's little recourse for those individuals, including me as a vendor, by the way, because what applies to an employee applies to a vendor, to be protected in their workplace from derogatory comments. So what the ERGs are most often finding themselves saddled with or taking on in terms of challenges are impact and influence, work-life integration, and climate. Those are the 3 things that establish the highest level of connection and alignment with the LGBT constituents that they might be supporting. And so you can see what some of those are, making sure that it would be great if there was a leader that openly identified themselves as GLBT. It would be terrific if there was, from a work-life integration standpoint, the comfort with openly sharing information about self with colleagues. From a climate, does the climate actively address negative treatment or inappropriate comments. And so remember back to an earlier slide, there was a real commitment on the part of most respondents to create change in their organization. And these are the kinds of changes that the ERGs are now facing. If you go to the next slide that talks about the role of the resource group, you can see that the resource group becomes a board of advisors. And for the LGBT as well as for any other constituencies, you can go right around the wheel and see what all the opportunities that an ERG has in order to help drive those individuals to higher levels of contribution within the organization. And those roles can be grouped by stage. So on the next slide, you can see that if most of your people are stage 2, then being a technical advisor, a sounding board, and a political decoder are the most valued things you can bring your constituents. If you want to move the people from stage 2 to stage 3, then understanding advocacy, impacting the organization from an ethical and moral standpoint relative to policy, etc. Being a personal advisor both to those individuals as well as to the organization are all roles that the ERG can take. So the last slide before we get into any kind of open discussion is the planning model that we follow when we do this work. And the first thing that we do is we help the ERG confirm that they have a mission that's in alignment with the organization's goals. And that's an important piece because the business reason for the existence of the ERG becomes critical to their success. The second piece is then to assess all the current activities. So we ask participants to make a list of everything it is that they're currently doing or they're planning on doing, and to look at that list through the lenses that I've spoken about earlier and others. So is it designed to attract executives and leaders to the organization? Is it designed to attract talent to the organization? Does it appeal to a broader constituency or broader employee population outside of your traditional constituency? And then step 3 is to develop a business plan. And I literally just left this process with another client. And the difficulty people have is listing all of the organizational objectives first on their plan, and then listing all of the initiatives, tactics, etc., from the ERG, and making a clear connection between the objectives of the company, what's going to support its growth and development, and the efforts of the ERG. And the struggle with the reality that if the correlation can't be made or it's too remote, then the activity should be suspect. And that's hard for a lot of affinity groups that are known for certain events or certain celebrations annually to say, do I have to do away with all of those? No, but if that's the only thing you're known for, you need to address your mix. And so how do you create a business plan that when looked at by leaders within organizations is not only approved but highly valued and appreciated? And then lastly, how do you communicate this to your constituents, to your non-constituents, the leaders, to the community? How is that plan brought to the workplace, workforce, and marketplace in a way that really increases the overall brand perception or value proposition that the company wants to project? So that's the process, and I'm open for questions right now. If there are questions that come up relative to how this works or how organizations have done this work in the past, I'm happy to talk to those.
Hey, Jerry, I have a question for you. This is Nancy.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about all of the different places that ERGs might want to look for objectives to align to? I find that people often miss some articulated goals around things like engagement and retention because they don't really know where all to look when you say align to the objectives of the organization.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great question for me because I run a consulting firm, so we have to find that data out ourselves. Where you want to look for those objectives is in any publication that your company has. So we pull down your annual reports before we walk in, and here's the reason why that's an important source. You are already making a promise to the marketplace and workforce by publishing those things. Go to your website and identify what are the promises that are being made to the organization, workforce, and workplace. Go to the annual report and see what promises are being made to the shareholders and stakeholders about growth. I'm always dismayed at the number of ERG participants that I'll have in a session like this, and as I walk around from table to table during the planning process, you'll hear people say, "Well, no one ever tells us," and it's just it's so disappointing because number one, where's the executive sponsor? A, and B, what's the relationship with the executive sponsor if you have a sponsor? That makes it difficult to ask the question. And see, if you don't have an executive sponsor, what is it? There should be at least someone on your group that is the sleuth, the person who asks the question about, what are the 3 things that's keeping the CEO awake at night? What are the 5 things that the board has challenged the organization to achieve in the next year? That information is critical to be heard by the ERG so that they can ensure that their efforts and initiatives are in alignment with those things. So we say don't stop asking, and go everywhere anybody else would go, which is go to the public website, go to the annual report, go to the shareholder conference, listen. The shareholder, the results that are oftentimes released to the market, to the street. Those conferences are always taped. You can find them on your internet. You should listen to what your CEO and leaders within the organization are saying they're going to do in order to keep the stock price up.
Jerry, let me say you're doing a great lead-in to part 2 of this series, which is next week and is about the role of executive sponsors and how to leverage executives and executive sponsors, because I do think your questions are excellent ones. Where are they and how are people utilizing them? And I had a discussion recently with an organization. I was doing some interviews with them as they have a really strong network in the U.S. and we're planning to expand globally. And I interviewed the executive sponsor first, executive champion, and he was effusive about what a great development opportunity it had been for him and what a privilege it was, and how even when his tenure was up, he re-upped again because he had enjoyed it so much, and he would recommend it to anybody to do it. And then I interviewed the 2 co-chairs of the organization and asked them what role the executive played, and they said, "We have no idea what he's doing. And as far as we can tell, he adds no value whatsoever." That's kind of indicative of the myth that I see between ERGs not knowing what to ask for, not really understanding how to utilize those folks, and those folks often waiting to be asked or doing something they think is helpful that might or might not be. So I love the advice of keep asking, open the dialogue, think about who and how you're using them.
The other thing that it does, Nancy, honestly, is that people love it when people ask smart questions. And so, managers, I was just with another client, and they were talking about the zombies that are their middle managers. These are people that are exhausted, they're beat up, they see people walking down the hallway, and they don't even lift their heads. And I said, and these are the same people that you expect to get support from relative to your initiatives. They're going to let people go, they're going to support them, they're going to, and so and one of my challenges is for every member of the constituency to go back, sit with your manager and say, look, I'm part of this group, if you feel comfortable saying it. I'm part of this group. We are committed to improving the organization. If there are 3 things that we could help impact for you to make your life easier, what would it be? And the answer will be more qualified help, clearer communication from leadership, and a sense of when any of this is going to lighten up kind of thing. And so it's amazing to me that oftentimes the requests are very simple when an individual sits down with his or her manager that says, I want to thank you for letting me attend these events. And in exchange, I'm committed to representing what it is that we can do in order to impact the business on your behalf. And they're surprised at that. They think that this is a party thing. Like, why do they need this group? There's a UK group for a blue chip company. The women's group refers to themselves as the Jam Tea and Knitting Society. And I said, really, what are you doing about that brand? And they said, that's the whole point. We don't want a brand. We don't want people to join us. And I said, well, so do you have an alternative women's group? Oh yeah, no, we have a women's business professional sort of title kind of group. But there are people within these affinity groups who don't necessarily want that responsibility. And they are doing a disservice to the rest of the resource groups by projecting that image or brand, because what we want is for these dialogues to happen between managers and leaders and organizations and the participants in these affinity groups. Plus, you'll get better quality participants. You'll get stage 3 participants or constituents because they see an opportunity to really make a difference. Anyways, I could go on. But.
Jerry, do you think that this, the data that you've provided, which is really rich, is it more focused on U.S. ERGs? You just gave an example outside of the U.S., but is there a difference, or does this hold true for non-U.S. based groups as well?
The data around the stages, the data around the stages, the women's information does reflect the global information that we gathered for the survey. But of course the white, Hispanic, Asian demographics do not. So, but I will tell you that the women's groups that are emerging outside the U.S., and I can tell you very rarely do I come across an intact chapter outside U.S. for an LGBT group at this point. Very few companies I see have it. In other words, that are initiated there. They're oftentimes in response to a U.S.-based parent, but there's still few and far between, at least in my experience. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah. I was pausing to see if any of our participants have a question for you.
Okay.
And I'm seeing one chatted in, how does an ERG get started moving from stage 2 to stage 3, assuming to your point, Jerry, that they actually want to?
Yeah, and I like the way this question was phrased. There are ERGs, whole ERGs move from stage 2 to stage 3. So think about it in terms of the characteristics and qualities that make up your brand. When we do this work within an organization, we have a brand assessment that has you look at how you are seen by others, how you are seen internally, externally, by each other, et cetera. And that's an important data point. But sometimes when an ERG forms, it's in stage 1 itself. It gets lots of direction from the company. Here are the forms you have to fill out. Here's your budget. You know, you don't necessarily want to run these kinds of events. No, we're not going to allow that to happen. And then stage 2 is where they're sort of percolating along on their own. You know, you see things pop up in your calendar that come from them. There might be a mention at a town hall for something that they did. Those are stage 2. Stage 3 is when you hear people saying, and this is an actual example, we want to thank the African American Affinity Network for the work that they did helping us prepare our lobbyists for lobbying on the Hill for this bill that we were hoping to get passed that would help us. Or we really want to thank our affinity group for identifying a population for this drug that we needed to test against this ethnicity to determine whether or not it worked differently. So thank you for that. I mean, stage 3 affinity groups really have a strong impact. Stage 4 affinity groups oftentimes are the oldest ones that exist within a culture. So they may be the women's group. There's an insurance company that I work with. The LGBT and women's group are the oldest groups within that group. They really sit at the table with the leader because the leader knows that they have a good deal of power, influence, and impact within the organization. So I just want to call out that whoever asked the question, just know your resource group itself moves through those stages. And how you move your resource group is based on the quality of the events and initiatives that you conduct. So if you want to move from stage 2 to stage 3, start conducting those events and initiatives that are linked to the business goals and objectives clearly and operate at a level that appeals to the stage 3 participant.
Great. Well, we're almost just about exactly at time, so I want to leave a little space for anyone to ask a final question.
And again, this is Pat. So one thing, Jerry, a lot of great information, but any closing thoughts? What would you want to leave the audience with today as we come down to the last couple of minutes here.
Yeah, I think the promise was, how do you create higher impact ERGs? And I think that if I were to leave with one or two comments, it would be define what you mean by impact. Establish what the definition is for your group. Talk to the sponsor if you have an executive sponsor to say how high is up here. We really want to be more meaningful or not. Gather as much data as you can. And then make sure you put together a plan that is conservative, that has 2 or 3 things done really, really well, and that have metrics that appeal to people other than, butts and seats or attendees, because the people that are outside of your group may not value those things as much as you might.
Great. And Nancy, any closing comments?
Well, I just couldn't have asked Jerry to kind of leave us hanging with the questions that we will try to answer next week and provide us great information along this path too. Lots of good things to think about. I know sometimes a session like this can be frustrating because we don't give people the answer. We don't say, here's exactly the 2 things you have to do. I think what Jerry has done is given you what you need to be asking yourself about what you're trying to accomplish, what will be successful in your organization, and how you're going to get there from where you are at the present. And it is a process, so really think about those 4 steps, both for yourself as an individual contributor, 4 stages, and for the ERG overall. And you have to chart the path based on the information that you get from the guidance that Jerry just gave. Read everything, ask questions, figure out what you're going to do, pick your spots, and then execute it really, really well with your audience in mind. So I just really appreciate, Jerry, the conversation today. I feel like we could probably continue this conversation for a long time. And I know for anyone who's in the Connecticut area, we'll get to do that with Jerry on Thursday because he'll be leading a whole half-a-day workshop for us. You can find information about that at Out and Equal in the Connecticut Regional Affiliate tab. If you have the opportunity to join us, please do. For everyone else, I welcome you to come back next week when we dive deeper into the question of the uses of executives and allies in your ERG or affinity group. And would just like to say a very heartfelt thank you to Jerry for the time today and sharing this great information and his expertise as well. So thanks so much, Jerry.
And I want to add my thanks as well for both Nancy and Jerry to be on the call. When we finish this call, there will be a short survey, so I'll stop the meeting. You'll drop offline. And if you could fill that out and give us the information. We'll be back next week on April 9th at 1 o'clock. And please, we will send out a follow-up email to be able to listen to the recordings on this. And you can find out more about our programs on the training page. And if you have any questions at all, please contact Pew or myself. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Please stand by.